Okay, this is my introduction. This project exists because I needed a better way to grow plants. I started growing plants a long time ago, but I'm not by any means an expert. However, I do like to experiment. So what I did here was I took a look at my plants and I said, you know what I'm missing here? I'm missing temperature. I'm missing a warm environment, a sunny Southern California environment, or a greenhouse. All that stuff I don't have. But what I do have is electricity. And I'm wondering, well, why can't I just use the electricity to heat up the plants? I guess if I could make a grow light for them, I probably would, but they're outside, so I'm going to depend on the sun to do that part. So the idea was, why don't I try to implement a heater? And so I started thinking, well, I have those little seedling mats, and they seem to do really well. And then people have greenhouses, so I'm wondering, has anyone ever thought about just heating up the soil? You know, not real hot, just, a nice moderate summer temperature to, bring that temperature above like the 50s or the 50s or 60s that it gets at night. And I'm sure it doesn't heat up immediately. So I bet you in the ground itself is pretty chilly. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I know caves can stay like, 62 degrees or 58 degrees year round, some temperature of the earth. And that's probably what the soil is, maybe even colder. So I started thinking, how could I incorporate a heater in the soil? So I did a little research, found some people on YouTube explaining how they heated their greenhouse with like a little heat wire that runs underneath the planters. And a couple ones I saw, there was people that would run the wire underneath with nothing, and then there's other people that put sand and gravel seem to be pretty popular to kind of spread the heat and maintain it. And then other people mixed it underneath the planter itself. So they put a layer of sand on top of their heater, and the sand didn't mix with the soil, or maybe it did a little bit, but the sand basically held the heat. So I'm thinking, and I thought about this, how can I do this? Okay, so after watching all those videos on YouTube and kind of having my brain swim around and all these different ideas, I decided that what I would do is I would build my heaters using seedling mats. Now these seedling mats, you may have seen them. They're just inexpensive, little heater, flat piece of plastic, maybe like a plastic on both sides, and it's sealed so it's waterproof with the electric element in the middle. Typically they're like 10 to 20 watts or so. They're not really high temperature or high electricity, but if you've ever used one to heat up seedlings and you lay a tray of seedlings in little cardboard pots on top of this pad, they do the job. They get it, 80, 85 degrees or so, depending on how cold it is in your house to begin with, but it's usually like, a little temperature rise that keeps them warm. So that's what I decided to go with. There are also ones you can get that have automatic timers, but being kind of a DIY person, I was like, I'll build my own timer, and build the circuit and all that stuff, which you don't have to do. So I just want to let you know, there are ones that are already made with timers and thermostats, ones that even have digital readouts, so you could set the temperature of what you want your soil to be right at the beginning without having to build all that stuff. Now keep in mind that that's the temperature right at the pad, so you might want to have it a little hotter than what you want your soil to be, because you're going to have heat losses through the soil, and so the surface of the soil is almost going to be close to the temperature of the surface or the air outside, but at the pad it'll be a much higher temperature, and you'll have kind of a gradient through the soil. So you have to keep that in mind, that you are going for like an average temperature. So to build the actual planter itself, I use these old, I believe they're polyethylene water barrels. Essentially, it's probably more like a chemical barrel. I believe these barrels had car wash soap in them, but they've been washed and drained so many times that there's basically none of that stuff left in there. And I used them for about 2 years as a water container. So whatever Sinus soap is in there, it's gone now. But deciding how to cut the barrel, that was sort of an exercise in my mind. So I just thought about, like, could I cut them lengthwise? Could I cut them crosswise? Maybe I should cut them at a slight angle, have it come up in the back, so I could maybe attach the planter wires or something to hold the plants, or, all sorts of ideas. I could cut it like a little bit off the top and then just have the majority of the barrel, have it either really deep if I cut it crosswise, or if I cut it lengthwise, just cut a little bit off, and then I'd have a smaller opening but more soil. So I decided to try to aim for about maybe 2/3 of soil. So I cut off about the top. I don't know, it seems like it's a little bit more or less than 1/3, so it's probably like the top 20%. So I cut off that top piece, and then the rest of it became the planter. And that bottom, the top piece that I cut off, I actually used that to attach to the bottom for more insulation. I put a piece of 1/2-inch foam in between the piece that I cut off, the top, and the bottom. So it's actually insulated on the outside and on the inside. The inside, I insulated it with like polyethylene foam. It's like that rubbery kind of foam. It's plasticky. It won't dissolve in water. It's pretty sturdy. It's kind of like heavy-duty bubble wrap. So I have I think they're 1/2-inch pieces. I've got 2 layers of that, so it's almost 1 inch, or maybe it's just 1 layer, around the whole inside where the dirt goes. And that was actually held in place while I filled it with everything else. And then in the sides, I put a drain, drilled a bunch of holes, 1/4-inch holes, I think they were, maybe a little smaller than that. And then probably about 12 holes on each end of the barrel. And then I put a piece of, it's almost like aquarium filter or something you'd find like in a synthetic quilt, like quilting material. I believe it's also like a polyester maybe it's polystyrene, polyethylene, something like that they use for like pillows and quilts, but it's not cottony, so it won't rot. And then I held that in place with a couple pieces of stainless steel wire I had. It's important to use, stainless steel wire, not just regular wire, because I guess you could use copper wire as well. That would hold up to the water. But I just had some stainless steel wire, so I used that to make a little filter so that my dirt didn't clog the holes and the dirt didn't all run out and make a big mess on the patio every time I watered it. And then once I had that all set up, I built a little frame for it to sit on so that it wouldn't roll around. And let me tell you about the rest of it. Okay, so what I wanted to grow was tomatoes and peppers, maybe a few different things later, but for now, tomatoes and peppers seem to be my go-to vegetables to grow. And where I grow them is 2 places, either out in the central Washington desert, which is really hot, or where I live, somewhere outside of Seattle. And it's actually been kind of cool this year, with the exception of a few days. But I realized, the temperature out here is almost just too cold for the plants. So I thought about how could I make a heater and put that into the garden soil. So I started brainstorming about what kind of stuff I have. And a lot of times, I try to put together the whole idea in my head before I start building. I've actually found that saves a lot of time. So you kind of decide what you have and you do a little visualization exercise. And you visualize the whole thing. Like, okay, here I am, I'm cutting open the planter, or I'm nailing these boards to the side. Oh, what boards can I use? Oh, well, I have these old 2x4s I can use. Okay. All right, and then what am I going to line it with? Do I need to line it with plastic? Do I need to buy plastic? Do I have some old plastic laying around? And then what can I use for the sand? Should I just dig up some sand? Should I go find a place where I can just get some, like at a beach or something? Can I just go buy a bag of it? I mean, it's not that expensive. And then just thinking about how I would do the drainage, how I would attach things to it. If it's a round thing, how do I keep it from tipping over? Stuff like that. So I visualized the whole project in my mind and had decided what I had, and this is what I came up with. So I wanted to show you my thoughts and how I put it together in this video. Okay, so I'm not going to go too deep into the timers and the electronics and all that. Just want to say that that was a little bit of a project in itself, but like I said, you can buy the pre-made thermostatic controlled heating pads. I believe there's even ones you can kind of gang together, so you could use one thermostat for multiple pads. There's a variety of those things available. If you search on Amazon, they're pretty easy to find. So if you don't want to use the thermostat, you'll have to build something like I did, which is a little control box with a couple of timers that have little relays that interrupt the flow of the power to the pads with the temperature control. So the temperature heats up, it shuts off the heater, it cools down, it turns the heater back on. Pretty simple process. And what I did is I insulated it with some sand. I used about 80 pounds, an 80-pound bag of sand, and I split that in between the two barrels. So each barrel has about 40 pounds of sand at the bottom. And I didn't want it to mix in with the soil. I mean, you maybe don't care. I guess it doesn't really matter, but eventually I'm going to have to take this apart and maybe reuse the soil, and I'd rather not have the sand in there. So I put them in some big 2-gallon Ziploc bags. So I isolated the sand from the soil. And I made about I think there's 5 bags on the bottom, and then there's 2 bags on top. So I just spread them out. So I got about, I don't know, half the sand for each barrel underneath the pad, and half the sand on top of the pads. I guess there's 2 pads, so that's pads. And then I threaded the wire through the side barrel. I kind of cut the barrel sideways, or since I cut the third off, I kind of lined it up so I would have the holes, the top barrels holes, kind of right where I wanted them to feed the electrical wires out. And then let's see, let me tell you about the rest of it. So some other things I will talk about in a future video if I have time, and I'm going to try to make the time to do this because I think it's important that people learn how to do this kind of thing, just, either economically or maybe as a hobby. I think it's actually a lot of fun. If you're older, it kind of keeps your mind sharp building things. If you're younger, it's a good way to learn about stuff, good way to learn about gardening, good way to learn about chemistry, good way to learn about electronics, good way to learn about water pumps, all that kind of stuff. So basically I just wanted to make it pretty simple, but I'll go into a longer video about that later. Some other things that I want to do is maybe just kind of estimate. People wonder, like, how much electricity is that going to use? Well, I mean, it's not that much. There's 4 pads in there, and they max out at 15 watts per pad. So altogether, that's 60 watts. So if it was on continuously, that'd be about the same as a 60-watt light bulb, which, I'm sure it's going to be a few dollars, but it's not going to be like, tens of $20, $50. It's probably going to be, I'd guess, I don't know, I can calculate it later, but I'm guessing about 10 or 12 bucks for the whole summer. And then let's see, the other things, there's different configurations you could use. So don't let this stop you if you don't have a barrel exactly like this, because you can build it in a planter of any kind. You could even just put it underneath like a wooden planter or a plastic planter, and then just kind of build a little insulation underneath it like sand, so you could put a planter in like a bed of sand that has the heater buried underneath that. And then might take a day or two for the whole thing to heat up and get that sand nice and warm, but once your planter's surrounded by that nice warm sand bed, it's basically going to heat up the soil in your plants, and it's going to be basically the same thing. And then, of course, let's not forget about the water. This one actually has a pretty simple watering system. It's me watering it. I know, big surprise there. But I also have some ideas on how to do a pump, and I've made several pumps in the past with timers, etc., etc. That's almost a whole new video in and of itself. So if you enjoyed this, I would appreciate maybe if you comment, just let me know. I'm sure there's a zillion things I did wrong, but if you found something I did right, that would be more important than all the stuff I did wrong, because I'm sure that's a huge long list. And if I keep making videos, I'm sure I'll get a little better at those things. So I appreciate your time, and I hope that this was worthwhile for you. Thanks, and have a great day.